or you're having a hard time hearing me, just go ahead and chat in the chat box, and I'd be happy to answer your questions as we go. So be in touch anytime. My name is Emily Easton. I am not, in fact, Martin Sheeler, the PhD candidate in physics who hosted this presentation at the LSMCE conference last month. I am the one who developed this presentation, rather. So my name is Emily Easton. I'm currently the Associate Dean of Students in the Physical Sciences Division at the University of Chicago. And my career has had a lot of interactions with career services. And so about 10 years ago, when I was working with graduate students in the social sciences, I realized that a lot of them were putting a lot of work into cover letters and resumes and all of the things you do to get a job, but they weren't very well prepared for the negotiation stage when they actually got a job offer. And so I started building presentations that were built from the best advice I could find. I talked to HR people, I talked to people who handle negotiations on both sides of the table, and built out this set of advice in the hopes that it would be helpful for people. Because a lot of people fail to negotiate, and I think that's a real shame. There's a great opportunity, especially when you are starting in a job, to do your best to advocate for the things that are going to make you the happiest and most productive in any given position. And it benefits everybody when you're happy and productive. So these are a few strategies on how you can help do that. So we are going to talk about why you should negotiate. We're going to review some negotiation basics. And then if there's time, I'm going to talk a little bit about academic versus non-academic negotiations. Depending on what career path you're headed for, there's a couple key differences that are important to understand. And usually, since I do this a lot with graduate students, it's helpful to understand where those differences are. So why negotiate? Well, first off, it has a significant impact on lifetime earnings. So what may just be a few $1,000s here or there at the start of your career can actually, over time, due to compounding interest and due to kind of each raise being based on the amount you made before, this can actually total up to be a really large sum of money towards the end of your career. There was a study that was done a few years ago that showed that people who negotiate earn, on average, $600,000 more over the course of their career than those colleagues who didn't negotiate at the start of job offers. So again, while it may not seem like you are negotiating over much money at the time, you have to think about the long game with negotiations and how that starting salary will continue to affect future salaries as you move through your career in any given direction. It's also worth noting that it is standard practice in nearly all professions to negotiate your starting salary. So if you're nervous about this, if you're concerned that you will surprise them when you start this conversation, you shouldn't be. In most cases, it is perfectly acceptable when you get a job offer to take some time to think about it and then come back with a counteroffer. If you are negotiating with someone in human resources, they are likely expecting you to counteroffer. And so if you're nervous to start that conversation, really don't be. This is all part of the job starting process. And the other big thing that I try and get across to people when I give these presentations is that negotiations are about so much more than money. I'm going to talk a lot about salary and money today because I feel like that's something that a lot of people have questions about and a lot of people are anxious about. But whenever you're in a negotiation situation, it's important that you're thinking about the bigger picture and thinking about all of the ways that you can get paid as opposed to just getting paid with your paycheck. And we're going to talk through what some of those things can be. So hopefully we've covered why negotiate, and we're going to go into the basics. So number one, negotiation basics, and these come from Deepak Malhotra. He is a professor at the Harvard Business School who actually teaches courses in negotiations. The number one rule to take away is that in any negotiation situation, the person on the other side of the table has to like you. Likability here is essential, because when you are negotiating with someone, you are effectively asking them to do more work on your behalf. If you are new to a job, even if you're in an existing job, whoever you are negotiating with has given you an offer, and then for them to get you more, they have to go back to a group of people, their own boss, their own organization, and work on your behalf. They're not going to do that if they don't like you. So throughout the process, and ideally, if you've gotten a job, it is likely you are likable. Throughout this entire process, it is important you are respectful and considerate of the person you are negotiating with to maintain that likability. There's also a second, piece that can be very important to mention, which is that in some industries, it's pretty common for someone new to a job to negotiate maybe with an HR person, but a lot of times you're going to be negotiating with your future supervisor. And so starting off that relationship on a good note can also pay dividends in how happy you are in your day-to-day work. Remember that if you're going to be working closely with this person, this conversation is another way that you guys are getting to know each other and how you work together. So maintaining likability throughout this is very, very important. Number 2, they have to think you deserve it. Professor Malhorda makes a great joke in his presentation on this, where he talks about that a lot of times people don't have a hard time convincing other people that they deserve something, but by following rule number 2, they end up breaking rule number 1, which is to say they lose their likability as they are advocating for themselves and the reason that they deserve more money, more vacation time, a better retirement package, whatever it is. It's important when you negotiate to make sure that you are reminding people specifically why you are worth what you're asking for. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. One thing I really like, I have a good friend who every single time he gets a new job offer, he asks for an extra week of vacation. Doesn't matter what the package they offer him in, he always asks for an extra week, and he always gets it. The rationale he usually gives people when he is asking for that extra week is he is someone that's in the customer service field. He is on email and phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is important to the clients that he be reachable at all times. His argument for more vacation is that because he is so accessible, because he is such an asset by remaining so accessible, he needs extra time where he can unplug and recharge so that he can stay effective for the rest of the year. And so again, in framing it in terms of what you can do for them, but also that you deserve this extra time or you deserve this extra salary, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you're bringing that up as you're negotiating. Ideally, if you've already got a job offer, you have done this during the interview to some extent. But one thing that you can be doing during the interview process is to really start paying attention to what the needs of that organization is, so that when it's time to negotiate, you can remind them of all the specific assets you bring to this exact position, so that you can remind them why you might deserve a little bit better package than they initially offered. The third thing is they have to justify it internally. So this is a big one, and this is definitely tough for people who are starting in a new job. And this is one of the only ways in which sometimes negotiating in a current position can actually be easier. Because when you're in a current position, you generally know what the organizational or cultural norms are. Whereas when you're starting in a job, you don't know. Does everybody leave at noon on Fridays? Does everyone have a parking space? Is it common practice to work from home a couple days a week? You often don't know those things yet. And that can make it difficult to negotiate, because if the person you're negotiating with can't justify it within the organization, they likely can't give it to you. You have to make sure, so here at the University of Chicago, parking, as it is on most college campuses, is a huge struggle. It is very, very well known that faculty can negotiate for parking spaces, but staff cannot. That's an organizational, cultural piece. We as staff can't bring that to the negotiating table because it won't be justified internally. That's just not the culture here. So as you are thinking about what you might negotiate for, it's really helpful if you can reach out to or talk to anyone else who works at the organization that you're comfortable being a bit candid with. You don't want to do something like, hey, how much do you make? That's a question that is very rarely taken kindly. But by having a conversation with people about what the organizational culture is it casual? Is it more formal? What are the hours like? Do people tend to set their own schedules, or is there an expectation that everyone arrives at 9 a.m.? Learning those little things can help you figure out what the culture will allow so that you can get the most of what you need within the context that you're negotiating in. And finally, they have to find flexibility. So not all things are possible. And while you might want a salary that's 200 times more than they offered you initially, that just may not be possible for whatever reason. So by finding flexibility, the more ways you give people to pay you, the more ways you can get paid. And so if they can find flexibility, maybe they can't give you that salary bump you asked for, but maybe they are willing to offer you a $10,000 professional development budget, which will mean you get to travel internationally for 2 conferences a year, and they would be fine if you extended your time in those places, so effectively you're getting a free international vacation. That's just an example, but that's one way that you could extend a salary into other areas. And there are lots of different ways to do this. But being open-minded at this stage is a really important thing to remember. I have a very, very good friend who once, by stating the salary and sticking to it, shut down all of the negotiations that were to follow because the company she was working for assumed that if she didn't get that salary, she wouldn't be interested in anything else. And that's kind of a game over situation. If you can show there are other things that you're interested in, that allows organizations to work with you to develop something that makes you happy. I just got a great question from Ernesto. Should we request that in writing or verbally? Ernesto, are you talking about counter offers? Are you talking about generally any kind of piece of the negotiation? Let me know specifically in the chat what more you're talking about, and I will address that as we keep going. Okay, the general idea with negotiations is you want to make it easy for them to give you as much of what you want as they possibly can. And so the ways you're going to make that easy for them is by making sure that you are likable enough that it is easy for them to want to spend the extra time. You are making sure that they think you deserve it so that it is an easy decision to present to a supervisor or someone else who has to sign off on this. Nobody gets to negotiate with a new job candidate alone. There is always someone else considered in those discussions. And so by making it easy for them to go back to those people because they think you deserve it and convince those other people you deserve it, you're making it easy for them as well. You're making it easy for them by asking for things that fit within the organizational culture as best you can estimate it, and also making it easy for them by being flexible to make sure that there are multiple ways that they can pay you. Professional development. So Ernesto, thanks for clarifying your question. Should you request that in writing or just verbally? It really depends on the context here, and industries can be a little bit different. My general advice is to model whatever communication style they start with. So if they communicate their offer to you in writing, you can communicate back in writing. Ideally, you want to combine writing with a conversation. Sometimes things that we say in email don't come across as clearly or as perhaps kindly as we might like them to in a general conversation. If these offers are getting made in verbally and you feel as though there is any challenge to that or there's any concerns you have, I think it's perfectly appropriate to send your negotiations partner a quick summary of what you talked about, just to be considerate, just to be friendly, just to be helpful. Again, anytime you are getting a new job, something important to think about is that there's an open position in the company. That means there is work that is not getting done. And usually the person who has to do that extra work is the person you are negotiating with. So another way to increase that likability is to, again, make it easy for them. If you want to send them an email saying, hey, Ernesto, I really appreciated that conversation we had today. I'm really looking forward to working with you to come up with a package we're both happy with. As a quick summary of what we talked about, I'm really interested in extra professional development, an extra week of vacation to make sure that I can stay recharged for customers. Whatever it is, quickly re-summarize what you've got so that way they have it in writing too. How do you figure out, this is a big question of when you're negotiating salaries, how do you prepare to negotiate for salaries specifically? The best thing to do in this case is to research the position's value. So start with the position you've got. Obviously, if they posted a salary, that makes it pretty easy, but most places don't do that. I would encourage you to look at positions at other institutions, other organizations that are similar to yours in the same geographical location. You can look at recent hires at comparable organizations to get a ballpark idea of what the industry standard might be in your area. There are great national data sets on this from the National Labor Board. And professional organizations and associations will often have some good information about what kind of salary ranges you can look for in any given position or organization. And lastly, man, networking is the solution to everything, and this is no exception. If you have the opportunity to talk to people who do a similar job, either at the organization or in nearby organizations, and talk to them about what might be an appropriate range for the kind of position you're looking at. Again, coming right out and asking for someone's salary is likely to get you nowhere. It might even lose you a friend or a connection. What you want to do is just try and get a general idea of what the standard is for that position in that area at that organization. And you want to be as specific as you can. When I was negotiating for this particular job, actually, I did all of this research. I was made a salary offer, and I did, I took a few days to think about it. And when I came back with my counter offer, I justified it by saying that I noticed that associate deans of students at various institutions actually made about this much, and could we come up closer to this number that I perceived to be the industry standard. And unfortunately for me, my negotiations partner had done far more research on this than I had. And she correctly pointed out that in my study, had I perhaps included associate deans of students at business schools, which were known to make a good deal more than the kind of academic program I was looking to work in. And if I reran those numbers, I would find that their offer had been fair. And when I did, she was quite right. So be careful with your homework. Don't make that same mistake, but do use all this information. John just chatted a great point too. Most states do have public databases you can search for salary. For any of you looking to work in higher education, public universities will publish all the salaries of their employees. This can be really useful information for you, though keep in mind, if you have access to it that easily and publicly, likely your employer does too. So make sure that you're using that information with caution and not using it to do things like set ultimatums or set demands. In salary, I think it's just as important not only to know the value of the position, but to know your own value. So basically, you want to know, what do you need to live? If you haven't done a budget in a while, when you start applying for jobs is the time to figure out what salary you need, what salary you need to live in the potential location you're looking to work in, and what kind of salary you need to live, not just the basics, but to live the way that you want to live. And that can mean a lot of things. It takes a little bit of self-reflection and self-examination to figure out what it is actually going to make a difference. I talk to people, because I do these presentations, people will often contact me for one-on-one advice, which you guys are all welcome to do. I will make sure my contact information is available. And a lot of times I'll talk to people who are unhappy in their current job, and they assume that a raise is going to be the solution. And I think that's kind of narrow-minded in a way, because sometimes the money's not going to make a difference. Or sometimes the way that they're coming up with that money that they think will make a difference, that amount that they're figuring out, won't actually be enough to what they want to do what they want to do. So I encourage you, think very carefully. What is it that matters to you? Is it being able to renovate your kitchen in the next 5 years? Is it sending your kid to college in the next 10 years? Is it buying a new car so that your commute is more reliable and you don't need to take public transport to work? Whatever it is, think honestly about what it is you would need to feel happy and productive with the salary you get, and really start to work that out in real numbers. If you know you want to go to Japan every other year, run a quick budget and figure out how much it would take you to make and save that amount of money. Whatever it is for you, make sure you know your own financial values. So what do you need to live? This is just kind of a quick brainstorm list. Rent, food, utilities, transportation, clothing, taxes, insurance, spending money, childcare, loans, etc. I always encourage people at this stage of the process, be honest with yourself. If you are, for example, a cigarette smoker and you think you're going to quit any day, be honest with yourself about what you need to put in your budget for that particular habit. Now is not the time to be idealistic. Now is the time to be realistic. What do you need and what resources is that going to take? So I encourage you to come up with 3 packages. First off, you've got the basic. The basic, if you're currently working in a job, should at least be what you're making now. So ideally, you are not losing money every month. If you are, that's a problem. But the basic, if you're currently working in a job, can be the salary that you're at. If you're new to the workforce, or maybe you're changing careers, or for whatever reason, that's when you need to run a careful, tight budget to figure out what exactly are the financial expectations that you will need to meet in any given month and in any given year. That's your baseline. You can't make less than that. Then you come up with a better. Think about the things that would make a little bit of difference for you. Is it having a budget to buy nicer clothes every month? Is it, again, going on a vacation twice a year? Is it a nicer car? Is it whatever it is? Think about the things that you think would make the most improvement within a reasonable range, and that's going to be your better package. And then, of course, you know where this is going. You want to build out your best package. My best package, just so you guys know, is $800,000 a year with 3 trips to Japan every year as well, and also 6 weeks of vacation on top of those trips to Japan. If anyone wants to offer me that package, there are not a lot of jobs I won't do. So that's kind of my best package. Now, Am I likely to get that? Probably not, and definitely not from a university unless something miraculous happens. But the point of having that best package isn't so that you could necessarily hit all those check boxes with your next job offer, but so that you know what you're working towards. So you can start to look at, if you really were given the most wildest, wonderful dream package in the world, what would it look like? How would it change your life, and what would you actually be looking for, so that when you are negotiating, you know where to prioritize and you know what might be the next step up for you. I try and reiterate this at this point, that salaries can be negotiated. Again, one of the things that always concerns me when I give these presentations is that not enough people are willing to give this a try. And so I try and take a point in the middle to just remind everybody that it is important that you are advocating yourself, especially at the start of a job situation, when you never have more power than you do then. As someone who has hired people, and you can talk to anybody who hires people, nobody wants to go back to the drawing board to look for another candidate after they've made a decision on you. So salaries can be negotiated, and salaries should be negotiated, especially at the start of that job offer. You should always be negotiating for more than salary. You should be looking at things like, and we're going to do a list in just a second, but you should be looking at all of the things that stand to make you happier and more productive, not just that number. There are more ways to get paid than just with a salary. So then what else is it? Well, again, vacation time, parking, transport, mileage, flexible hours, your title, a clothing stipend. When can you ask for a clothing stipend? If you meet with high-level clients and it's important that you look professional in every given context, it's worth talking to your employer because it is in their best interest to make sure that you look good every time you see a client. That's when you ask for a clothing stipend. You can ask for a tuition reimbursement, professional development, office space, computer, all sorts of things. Okay, so we did the whys, we did the basics. Let's talk a little bit about academic jobs and non-academic jobs. So the big difference with academic jobs is that negotiations begin before you have a job offer. This is a huge difference because in non-academic jobs, including staff positions, you never discuss salary until, or any sort of package, until after you have received a job offer. Never, ever, ever. In fact, it is in your best interest to not even let them know what you are currently making so that you don't skew the salary line down when it comes time to negotiate. But with academic jobs, if you're applying to be a faculty member somewhere, those negotiations will begin before you have a formal offer. Because in academic jobs, especially research-oriented academic jobs, it's important that they understand all of the resources you're going to need to be a successful professor, including what you might need for a lab setup. And so it's important that everybody is getting those resources together before they finally make an offer. The academic job process is a little bit different. So this is just kind of a quick outline. The applicant applies, then there is a campus visit, and that's when the negotiations begin. That's when you're going to face questions like, so would you like to live here? Do you have a partner? Very commonly, academic negotiations will include some discussion if you have a spouse or a partner and what kind of positions they might be interested in. They will show you lab spaces and talk to you about what kind of spaces might work for your research, grad students, all of these things. The negotiations will continue in your formal offer, but it's important to remember that by the time the formal offer happens, that is not the time for surprises. So in academic negotiations, one of the reasons the negotiations begin earlier when you're visiting campus is because all of the faculty hiring committee is working to marshal those resources for you likely. When you get your formal offer is not the time to spring something like, oh, I'm going to need an extra $50,000 to do this, or oh, I'm actually going to need this super sophisticated piece of scientific equipment or I won't be able to pursue my agenda. So it's important that you, if you are applying for a faculty position, have thought through your negotiation strategy in advance. John has another great point here, which is that at Indiana University, there's a dual career network. The dual career network is for faculty members or a faculty person who is married to a non-faculty person who may need support getting a job. Being a faculty member is rough. You have to move every few years, and that can be difficult for a partner who has to uproot his or her career when you change positions as a faculty member. Relocation can also be part of an academic job negotiation, and I would argue that part of getting a job for your partner or spouse can be part of that relocation cost as well. You know, this is going to be a financial hit for you as a family if both people aren't employed, perhaps. So it's important that you're thinking about that as part of that. Deb's also making a good point that relocation costs are something else you can negotiate for, and that is not exclusive to the academic job process. If you are applying for jobs in other states, no matter your industry, you can always talk to them about what it would cost for you to relocate so you can be there. Non-academic jobs, never, never, never before the offer. If I could have made this never font even larger, I probably would have. Non-academic jobs, it's important that you're not talking about salary before the offer because it closes off opportunities, and frankly, it's rude. It will compromise your likability. So what you want to try and do here, when you give a number, so a lot of people bring this up when I give this presentation, that when you apply for a job, they will often ask you, what's your current salary? And you have to put in a number to move it first. Put in a 0, put in a 1, put in some number that is so ridiculously low that it is clear you are not telling the truth, but that will get you through the system. This is how you get past online applications. And the reason that you don't want to be honest here is that once you offer a number, it will anchor any future conversations about your salary to that number. Ideally, you don't want to be the first one to give a number if you can. Offering the wrong number can close negotiations before they even start. So you may not be considered for a job if you perhaps make a little more than the position might require. But again, there are other things besides salary that you could be talking about. What if they were willing to consider a 4-day work week? What if they were willing to consider giving you the entire summer off? Would you be able to make less if you didn't have to pay childcare to take care of your kids all summer? There are all sorts of different ways to construct a hiring package that aren't just about that number. So if you can, avoid giving that number at all costs. And again, you don't talk about salary without an offer, because before you have an offer, you do not have a job. People will try and push you on this. My favorite way to handle this is when I'm asked about these kind of things in job interviews to say, you know, I really haven't had a chance to think about what a compensation package here might look like. I've just been so focused on figuring out if we're going to be a good fit for each other, I haven't gotten to that stage. But I'm sure if you're interested in making an offer, we'll come up with something that's more than fair for both of us. That's it. If they keep pushing you, you can be jokey if you want to. You know, ask, are you offering me a job? Is this a job offer? But until you actually have a formal job offer, do not start talking about salary. Another key difference for academic jobs is that negotiations need to include your professional resources, especially if you're in the science field, because you're going to be using all of your resources to set up your lab and build a research agenda. It's important that you're accounting for all of the things you will need to be successful. In the biological sciences division here at the University of Chicago, for example, new faculty are expected to pay their own salary within 2 years. They are expected to successfully apply for and secure grants that pay for their own costs and salary within 24 months. It is essential in that scenario that you have been upfront to get yourself the resources you will need to complete the research that will get you the grants that will later fund your position. So if you are going up for this, you need to consider your research agenda very carefully and what resources you will need to advance that agenda. This could be office space, lab space, equipment, access to equipment. Maybe you can't have a particle accelerator all to yourself, but can you use one nearby easily? Teaching releases, graduate students, undergraduate students, travel and conference fees. This is a huge one that faculty forget to negotiate for, but presenting at conferences, whether or not you're an academic, always makes the institution look good. It's important to think through what that's going to cost you so it's not coming out of your personal income for you to fulfill that responsibility. Summer salary, computers and software, again, spousal hiring opportunities, and Deb, relocation, that's a huge one. Whatever you're doing here in this, I'm going to go back to rule number 1, they have to like you. You have to stay likable through all of these conversations you're having. So again, be considerate, be mindful. One thing to do that I really like when I'm in negotiations, and even though I do these presentations, when I negotiate for my own salary, I definitely get nervous now and again. One thing that I like to do to remind my negotiations partner that we are in this together is to say, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm looking forward to figuring out what the best package is going to be for both of us, but I want you to know I'm enthusiastic about being here. And by starting off that way, I think you set the tone with your negotiations partner that this is going to work out. One of the other rules that Deepak Malhotra talks about is they have to think they're going to be able to get you. Again, negotiations are a lot of work for both sides. As you've seen throughout this presentation, you're going to have to put in a lot of preparation to be ready for this. And the person on the other side of the table is also going to have to do a lot of work, especially to advocate on your behalf. It's important that they like you so that they're willing to do that work, but it's also good to reaffirm to them that you are working together to find a package that is going to make you happy and productive, keep you in the position for a while, and that speaks to their interests, all while satisfying you. This is not easy. This is never easy. Negotiations are stressful no matter how prepared you are, but they are very, very worth it. Again, think about the long-term impact for your career overall and make sure that you are taking the time to research and be ready to have these conversations when they come. Your happiness in a job comes down to a lot of these things to negotiate for, so it's important that you're advocating for yourself. Okay, questions? You're welcome to chat them in. I'm happy to sit here and take questions. I will make sure that my contact information gets out to all of you so that you can email me in any specific scenarios. Ernesto, I can see you're typing. I'm excited to see what you're typing. While Ernesto is typing, I spent a lot of time talking about how to negotiate in a new job. I did not spend a lot of time talking about how to negotiate in a current job. People will often say that it's a lot harder to do that. And in some ways, I think it definitely is. One advantage of being in a new job is that you do have that upper hand. However, when you're in a current job, you have a lot better idea of what's possible at the organization. So I think it's easier to advocate for things that you will actually get. I actually just recently was able to negotiate in my performance review to change my hours, which made a huge difference in how I approach my workday, but it took me a while to figure out that that was something that this culture would allow. So one thing that's definitely good about if you're in a current position, you have more knowledge, even if you have a little bit less authority as someone who's in an established position, but it's definitely worth doing. All right, Ernesto, once you have a formal offer, what should you communicate to other companies currently considering? What should you share with competing companies? Ernesto, you have some great questions today. Okay. Nobody likes an ultimatum. And so in the interest of staying likable, what you don't want to do in situations where you have multiple offers or you are waiting is to pit them against each other in an aggressive way such that the person you're negotiating with feels threatened. It really depends, Ernesto, in the situation you're talking about. When you have multiple offers, you are in a really good position. What you can share with competing companies, it really depends who you ultimately want to work for. So let's say you've got 3 job offers and you definitely want to work for the first place, but you're lukewarm on 2 and 3. What you can do with position 1, assuming they're all coming in at the same time, which is unlikely, but we'll try and think through a scenario where that happens. What you can share with competing companies is that you are entertaining other offers and that you are most interested in it. And it's important to be truthful in this case. Don't lead a company on if you really are not interested in them, but hopefully you can figure out which organization you're most interested in working with, and that's the one that you really want to negotiate with. You want to encourage them to bring their offer as close to the next best offer as they can. I mean, you can share, as long as you haven't signed anything, which would strike me as unlikely, but all situations are different. As long as you haven't signed anything, you can be reasonably candid with your one offer. I would encourage you not to give a specific number, so you don't want to say, oh, well, company B is offering me $60,000. I would encourage you to say something like, well, company B is definitely offering me a more competitive salary that's closer to the $50,000 to $70,000 range. That kind of flexibility, or even the $60,000 to $70,000 range, that kind of flexibility gives you a little more wiggle room for them to work with you. What should you communicate to other companies currently considering you? At a certain point, you're going to have to let them know to withdraw their consideration. So I would say, share as many details as are going to be relevant for the negotiation that you're actually interested in participating in. But that's a great question. For those of you who are in current jobs and thinking of negotiating, it's pretty well known that you have the best hand in a current job when you have another job offer on the table, because that is an ultimatum. Be careful with that, though, because you could be called out by your supervisor. So it's never good to go marching into your boss's office and say, hey, give me this, or I'm headed over to the place across the street, because she or he may well say, well, it's been great working with you. Enjoy that place across the street. Oh, Ernesto, you're in a great position, but you're in a tough position. You have one offer, but 2 other companies are moving you up to the next steps in the hiring process. I would be happy to chat with you online or offline about your specific situation, but the question is, how much do you like the first offer? How much do you like the first job? How much do you like the first company? Can you negotiate with the first offer to give you a longer time period to make your decision? That's another thing that you can do to extend the offer. There's a lot of different variables here that you can play with. I'm going to chat you my email address, and you can just shoot me a message. Please be in touch. And that email address, Deb, Paul, Tommy, John, everybody, you're welcome to email me with questions about this. I am a huge dork for this. And I can't participate in all of the negotiations happening all over the world right now. And so I love to hear from people, things they're learning in their own conversations, pieces of my advice that have worked, pieces of my advice that have not worked, all sorts of weird things you've come across. So please be in touch anytime. I always learn something when I do these presentations from the people that I'm working with. So I love to connect with folks afterwards. Unless there are more questions, I have probably covered everything I have to do today, so I may let us go a little early. Thanks so much for having us. I can see an eval for today's event in the bottom left. It is so helpful when people fill out evaluations for things like this. It helps people like me craft better content. It helps people like Deb plan better content. So yeah, definitely let us know what you think, good or bad or otherwise.
Thanks. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it.